Here. I'm just so excited. Actually, I'm tripping up over my words already. Hey, welcome to the Kingdom Builders podcast. This is a podcast that is dedicated to providing biblical business strategies, success tips, and practical wisdom to help faith-based entrepreneurs build their influence, expand their impact, and elevate God's kingdom. And I have a special guest with us today. If you don't know Loren Norris, you're going to learn to love him very quickly, and we're going to cover a lot of different topics. And when I was looking you up, Loren, I just didn't know where to start. And if you're watching this right now, let me just give you some of his many accolades. Like, we could literally spend this whole podcast talking about what he's done. But Loren, he is a premier expert on the topic of storytelling. And if you're in business, you've all heard the adage, facts tell, stories sell. We know how important it is. But if you're like me, we've struggled to tell this story. Maybe you struggle with putting it and making it very concise, or maybe you felt like you've been lost in it. We're going to dive into that. Loren, his core program is called Superpower. We'll talk about that more as well too. But besides that, he's a certified John Maxwell Leadership Coach. In fact, one of his founding partners in the John Maxwell team. If you know John Maxwell, if you don't know John Maxwell, you've been living under a rock. He's the premier leadership expert. Loren is an experienced marketing communication strategist. And what I've really loved about Loren is his ability to deliver very concise, practical wisdom in crafting a story. I've seen much story training throughout my entrepreneurial career, but when I watch Loren and seeing how he coaches people, seeing how he delivers it, he is a person that practices what he preaches. He is gifted, but not only that, it's a humility that he has. And there's a rare few people these days that are not just amazing entrepreneurs and communicators, but also people that are truly walking with the Lord. And you can see that permeating through Loren. You can see the gifts of the Holy Spirit just oozing off of him. So I'm excited to have this conversation today. And this one, you're going to want to have a notepad and a pen. I have mine right here. If you're not already subscribed to this, subscribe, share, like, and follow everything that Loren does as well too. But Loren, welcome to the Kingdom Builders podcast. How are you?
I am very well. Thank you for having me, James.
Absolutely. It's a great honor. So diving right into it, Loren, you've been in this communication story, entrepreneurial space for quite a bit. You look amazing though. Seriously. You have I feel like you're just getting started. Loren, I'm very impressed because you're everywhere. You have a podcast, you're on all platforms. You're just getting warmed up, I feel. But for those of us that don't know your background story, do you mind sharing how did you step into this entrepreneurial space and business space?
Well, I spent 5 years in the military right out of high school, and it was for a lot of purposes getting free of my hometown. I grew up in a small town in Central Texas, and there was a lot of there were more cows than there were people. When I say small town, I mean small town. There was a lot of what I would call redneck mindset. And so I grew up with phrases like the rich get rich, the poor go broke, and it's the rich's fault. So even when I made it into corporate America after my time in the military, became a firefighter in the military and realized coming out, that is not what I want to do with my life. I want to do something else. And I realized people that were making money in sales. And I dove into sales, worked my way up into Verizon. I was in the Verizon sales channels and then the Verizon corporate marketing team. So working for a Fortune 50 company is a whole different mindset. But the thing that I realized was that the story that I was telling myself hadn't changed. I was working in a place where I was knocking on six figures every year. At the end of the year, I'd do my tax report and realize, man, if I just closed one more deal, I would have broken that six-figure barrier. And yet something inside of me was sabotaging that because I still believe the rich get rich, the poor go broke, and it's the rich's fault. Who wants to be rich? And so I would sabotage my own success for that reason. Unfortunately, I did the same thing in relationships. I gave my life to Christ at 9 years old, but I lived a whole lot of my life as far from that as you can possibly get. So in my 20s, when I was in the military, I recommitted my life to Christ, but I was still living with feet in both worlds.
Right.
Kind of like I was doing in business. I was living as an entrepreneur with a strong side hustle and working a full-time job at the same time, and living in a marriage relationship and struggling with an addiction of my own. And what I found even in all of those was the story that I was telling the guy in the mirror was as detrimental to my life as the story that I was telling to my spouse, the story that I was telling to my kids, the story that I was telling about my business, the story that I wasn't telling about the opportunities for success. And so as all of that kind of came together as a whirlwind, I began to realize I am like that tugboat that's rowing strong to the right and then strong to the light and strong to the right and then strong to the left and but really only going in small circles in each direction and not making any forward progress. If you watch a rowing team, they stroke together right and left at the same time. And that's not what I was doing in my life. And I realized, 10 years into my marriage, I was not the father I was meant to be. I was not the husband I was meant to be. I was not the business owner that I was meant to be. I was not the employee that I was meant to be. I wasn't living up to my potential in any aspect. And it was because the story I was telling myself was self-sabotaging in every aspect. And it was time to break that.
Makes sense. And something that you say, Loren, and what I hope people are picking up right now is already, I hope you're taking notes on not just what Loren is saying. I'm taking notes already on how Loren is sharing his story as we speak. And one thing that you talk a lot about is when we talk about story, typically in a sales or a leadership or a business space, we use it more of a tactical thing. And there is power in the story. I mean, Jesus did most of his talking in parables. We know that as well too. However, something that you say, Loren, is that the story, it's an inside job. And that's what I'm hearing you say there as well too. Can you elaborate more on that as well too, the importance of understanding that?
Yeah, so if you listen to any of the experts, and when I say experts, I mean mind science, neuroscience, psychology. Dr. Jordan Peterson, for an example, has an elaborate course called self-authoring. And you can pay a couple $1,000s and be a part of this course. And he literally forces you through the process of writing out some of the stories of your own life, things that you've been through, the traumatic instances and the grand successes. Well, that's not unlike what you see with Dr. Caroline Leaf and what she calls the neuro detox, where you're actually going through the process of looking at the old stories in your life. Bruce Lipton talks about how the things that you say to yourself are going to change your heart rate and your blood pressure and your brain matter. And we often forget that those things are true. But when you hear a 9-year-old do something and then immediately say, I'm so stupid, that's a story. And the challenge is it's a story that they will believe. And like anything else, the more often you say it, the more likely you are to believe it. Well, that becomes a sacrifice very soon, because even if it's not true, you act as if it is. And so that whole concept of the law of awareness, when you become aware of something, you begin to key in on it and you're like, oh yeah, I heard those words before. I've seen that before. We do that both positively and negatively. During the Dale Carnegie course, I heard a word. I coached the program for about 5 years. And one of the things that we talked about in every single session was the reticular activating system. And it is that part of the brain, part of the imagination center that says, I've once seen a green Buick. Now my senses are heightened to see green Buicks. And if you didn't own a green Buick, you probably never noticed how many were out there. But the day you buy one, everybody in the world has one. Zig Ziglar says the same thing. Well, the sad part is when we see ourselves as failure and the story we tell is failure, guess what we find everywhere we look? Failure. Dr. Caroline Leaf, Bruce Lipton, Daniel Amen, all of them will tell you, both in the quantum physics world and in the psychology world, the more you focus on something, the more of that you get. The things that you don't pay attention to seem to diminish. And there was a great neuroscientist that was on Tim Bellieu's interview just a few days ago. And she said, there's a way to watch the muscles around the eye as the focus changes from something very narrow to something very broad. She said, as you do that, it's changing the psyche. And it literally is cueing the person that you're talking to that you're not paying attention anymore.
Wow.
Without a single word. Okay, well, let's put all that together for a moment.
Yeah.
When a 9-year-old says, I'm such a failure, I'll never succeed at this, and they say it long enough that they begin to believe it, they change their focus in life. They're no longer looking for opportunities to succeed or real successes in life. No, instead, they're spending all of their time looking for, and astutely responding to failure.
Makes sense.
And it never changes.
Makes sense.
That's a scary, scary aspect of someone's subpsyche, but it's really prevalent, especially in sales. We tend to do what? In sales, we sell from our own pocketbook. If I know how much money I have and I think, holy cow, that's an expensive product, I'm going to have a really hard time selling it because I'm thinking, well, I couldn't afford it. I don't know who the somebody is who could afford it. That's not me. And so suddenly, even deep down in our subconscious mind, we know that's expensive. And so we're bashful about offering it, even though the client who wants it says, I would have given an arm and a leg if that really solves the problem that I have. I would have sold my car. I would have moved out of my house and lived in a bus if buying that program would change my life.
Yeah.
And yet we don't offer it to them because we feel like, well, it's priced too high or they really can't afford it. And we have no idea what people are willing to give up to get what they really want. It's the story. It's the self-narrative, the way we write it ourselves.
Makes total sense. Guys, I hope you're taking a lot of notes on this. You just heard a bunch of, you so beautifully crafted it from quantum physics to psychology to biology to everything, guys. The mind is so fascinating. And one of the ways to break free of mind is just going through my own personal journey. Awareness, study, understanding. When you're aware of the law of awareness, as you mentioned, Loren, when you're aware of these things, then you can actually start to do something. So you're going to want to go back. This is one of those. He just spewed out a lot very quickly, very well. You're going to want to play that multiple times. This is already one of those podcasts you're going to want to re-listen to. So I got that down. Now, one thing that I'm curious about is I wonder, because you talk about psychology, physiology, quantum physics, and it's also very interesting on the spirituality side too. My personal experience, Loren, and I wonder if you would agree or what you would say to this is I had been through a depression time in my life. My first business failed. I was 6 figures in debt. I was just like, oh my gosh, I was a person of faith, but I wasn't walking in that area. I was still very attached to my finances and my self-worth and all of that. And the way that I was able to overcome it was really understanding what God said about me and understanding the mind. I'm a deep student of the mind too. And I try to do all the other things. And even though I knew it, I couldn't. But there was something about my faith and spirituality and knowing what God says that changed my life. You had a lot to say about things like Philippians. You had a lot to say about 2 Corinthians and things like that. But what's your take on the spiritual tie to how we can practically use it to reprogram ourselves?
So one of the things I find the most fascinating is we know that there's a scripture passage and most people butcher it, manipulate it, and use it for other means when they say money and love, bad. But that's about as precise as they are with the statement. That's not what was said. What was said is that the love of money is the root of all evil. Okay, so if it's not having money or having too much money or having not enough money that creates problems, is it the love or is it the thing? And the truth is, it's the affection. If you are so wrapped up in yourself, your identity, and your money as they're tied together, then you're going to have a problem, spiritually speaking.
Right.
Now, let me take that one step further, though. I have 4 children and 10 who call me Poppy. And there's not one of them that I want to see broken, destitute, homeless, hopeless, depressed, separated from things in this life and feeling like I'm just not going to make it. There's not one of them that I would celebrate that for, not one, because I love them. I believe it's Psalm 37:10 said, I've never seen the righteous forsaken, nor their children begging bread. And yet the irony is there are those whose religious understanding says, well, Jesus didn't have a place to lay his head, so we should be just as broke as he was. Well, again, they've taken it out of context. And if you study that from a Hebrew mindset, what he was really saying is, all these political leaders, they've kind of got their beds lined with, the greatest things. That silver fox he was referring to was actually a king at the time. That was a code name or a nickname that everybody used, that gray fox or that silver fox. And so when he said that, he was talking about Herod, not about himself. He was talking about not the animals of the field, but about political structure. And he said, look, I don't have to have a foundation or a kingdom. My kingdom isn't here. The old great fox has a place. He has a headship. That's his. That statement had nothing to do with wealth and money as much as it had to do with power, prestige, position, and the things that we cling to. But what he did say was, if the flowers of the field and the birds of the air are taken care of by your Father, why would you expect anything different than that? Don't you understand that you're of significantly more value to him? I've been in the place, unfortunately, as a pet owner, as a pet parent, however you'd like to label that, of having to put one down.
Mm.
And it was heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
It was hard. But after that snake bite and the paralyzation, and I knew there was not going to be any hope of survival, it was the merciful thing to do.
Mm.
Ask me to do that to one of my children, though, that's a whole different ballgame. The
Right.
animals of the field are one thing, my children, a totally different. And I believe Abba Father has the same sensibility to say, these are my children. This is nature, but these are my children.
Yeah.
When we understand that his love for us transcends everything else, we should be able to step back with the peace to say, I don't have to figure out how to make 100,000 or 100 million or $1 billion. That's not necessarily my role. My role is to hear and obey. I believe it's Matthew 6:33. It says, seek first the kingdom. He'll take care of the rest of it.
Yep.
You do your job, what I put you here for. Love me, love my people. I'll take care of the rest of the stuff. And the rest of it is small stuff. We get our focuses separated. And then we think, well, if I'm going to be a good believer in Christ, then money can't have anything to do with it. And yet when we see the 10 talents, he said, look, take care of what I gave you. Everything that I gave you has the ability to multiply.
Yes.
I didn't give you one seed that grows one plant. Every seed grows 100 plants. And every one of those grows another plant with another fruit that has more seeds that bears more fruit 10 times over. And it just keeps multiplying. So if the seed God's given you, if the talent God's given you hasn't multiplied, you're not sowing it in the right place. You're not nurturing it properly. And we know he gave everybody gifts. So what do you need to change to sow it properly, to nurture it properly, to give it a chance to grow? And again, that goes back to the story in your head. What do you believe about the gifts he's given you, and how could you multiply them, not only for your own good, for the purpose of having an orchard, but to feed those who need to feed from the orchard that you're going to grow?
So important to understand this. When it comes to faith, I think it's so powerful. But just like we were talking about, the stories that we believe, are they true with a capital T, or are they true with a lowercase t? And so many times it's unfortunate we've been fed interpretations by well-meaning people, usually, that just don't understand the Bible. And I think the biggest issue is this, Loren, is that people don't read the Bible. They don't actually study the Bible, right? But what you just went through, even with King Herod, I'm going to look at it. That's awesome. If you actually study the word, there is so much prosperity, there is abundance, there is success, there is so much grace. And it's not just about money, but money's a part of that as well too. But you have to be able to untangle these things. And I know when it comes to untangling any story in your own mind, it starts with understanding that truth. So I'd love to dive into, so going back to, you were stuck at 6 figures or right under, and you had this story in your mind. And we all have stories. And I want the listener, I want you to think right now, you know this story. Everyone knows their story, because the results are the name of the game. You know what that is. And money's a good place to start, because you can count that. So we're telling ourselves a certain story at that level. How did you untangle that and then reform that story to serve you?
So the honest answer to that is, it is an ongoing process. And when I say it's an ongoing process, I still have just barely broken the 6-figure. I haven't broken the 7-figure mark yet. And I'm okay with that. And here's why. When I was in Honduras, when I was in England, when I was in the UK with the Air Force, I went there having a motorcycle endorsement, meaning I've been riding motorcycles. I started when I was 10 or 12 years old. I've been riding them. I had a license since my 18th birthday. I've ridden big bikes. In fact, the one I have right now is a 1600 cc. Literally, the house vibrates. You can hear the dishes. If it's idling in the garage and I come back inside, you can hear the glasses in the china cabinet. It has a lot of power. But in the UK, when you learn to ride, they don't care if you're 15 years old, 18 years old, or 48 years old. For the first 2 years that you ride a motorcycle in the UK after you get your license, the biggest engine you can ride is a 125 cc. Why do you think that is? Well, it's because the potential of that much power is life-threatening, not just to yourself, but to somebody else.
Right.
My sons both want to ride motorcycles. One of them has since bought his own. The other one still wants to. Both of them on a regular basis want to jump on my bike. My younger son now owns 3 bikes, one big one like mine and 2 crotch rockets. And he rides all over the place, and he rides in traffic, and that's his daily traffic and his daily driver. But see, I learned to ride in a town that was more cows than people before the days of cell phones, when people didn't cut you off in traffic because they were more concerned with their TikTok and whether or not they had the right filter on. So his life is in significantly more danger. And we live in a town of 5 million people. So there's a whole lot more potential danger for him.
Yeah.
But even now, his motorcycle is 1/3 the engine size of mine. And so when he says, Dad, I'm going to take your bike today, I'm like, no, you're not quite ready for that. So the reality, I think, when it comes to money, God's ability to trust us with anything, lives, wealth, education, skills, talents, relationships, they're all tied to our ability to properly steward what we've already been given responsibility over. And I believe that's an ongoing test, because it's not about us and our peace and our joy and our happiness. While a lot of us would like to think God's purpose is making me happy. No, not even close. God's purpose is making you perfect.
Yep. Amen.
Without blemish, without spot, without wrinkle. And that's not easy work. Trust me, I've raised kids. The reality, though, is the amount of discipline and maturity and responsibility that we demonstrate is also the other side of the foundation of God's ability to trust us with more resources. And so, having grown up with no concept of money, when my wife and I got together, and she knows I tell this story, there was a season that we would spend more money in NSF fees because it was $20 worth of gas here, or $5 worth of lunch there, or $2, and we were writing checks at the time. Yeah, we're that old. We were writing checks at the time, and so a check would be 3 days before it would go through the bank. But it would hit the bank, and a $5 check would cost me $35 in NSF fees, and then another one, and then another one. And it was 2 days before payday, and all these checks are hitting. I'm like, you realize if we just look at all of what we made and all of what we spent, the gap is actually we made more than we spent. The reason our account is negative is because of when we spent it and all of the fees.
Right.
And so literally we won a cruise at one time, and she wanted to upgrade to a cabin on the balcony rather than an inside cabin. The cost was $250. At the time, I was making close to 6 figures. And she told me she had agreed to do that and was about to process the fee. And she had me on the phone. She said, "Are you okay with this?" And I'm like, "What's the balance on the account? And do we have any NSF fees?" And the truth was we had more NSF fees that month than the cost to pay for the upgrade.
Wow.
And I said, cancel the cruise. We're not disciplined enough yet to be trusted with something like that. Now, we're at a place now where we tithe regularly. We participate in every place that we can with our giving, and we do a much better job, not a perfect job, but a much better job of managing and handling the resources that we have. Do I think we're ready to be millionaires yet? I wouldn't trust me just yet, but I'm working on being there. Does that make sense?
I love
I'm just trying to be honest. If I were to say I'm ready to be a millionaire, I might find ways to do that and even find the right relationships. And I believe I have the smarts to do it, but I'm not sure that my heart is ready to be a billionaire just yet. I'm not sure that I trust me enough for that. And that's a growing process as much as anything else.
Makes total sense. Loren, I appreciate the transparency, and I think it's so fresh and important. We live in a day and age, you mentioned your son and the generation that we're in and everything, where it's all filtered. Everyone looks like they're rich and famous. Everyone's Insta famous, all these things. But I think as an entrepreneur, as a leader, what will make you stand out today is exactly what Loren just did, is just be genuinely and authentically who you are. And that makes you believable. That makes you trustworthy. And that lends a lot to an actual relatable and actually a persuasive story as well too. I want to dive into some story now, because that is, you are so good at that. And you figured out when it comes to a story, I want to ask you, when it comes to business, when it comes to leadership, when it comes to influence, and I know your mentors, John Maxwell, says leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. Stories are so powerful. And I think it's so cliche, Loren, that I think we don't take it as seriously as we should, but it's that one thing that can transform anything. But um, let's talk about stories and the importance of them in business and sales. What are your thoughts on that?
So what I want to do, and
Yeah.
for those taking notes, I want you to put your pen down. I just want you to listen, maybe even close your eyes. I'm going to take about 90 seconds. Feel free to time me if you think it might be
Hmm.
more than 90 seconds. I'm going to tell you a very quick story, and then I'm going to tell you behind the story. I'm going to give you a little bit of education on why I select that story. I use it often, what it means, and why it works the way it does.
Awesome.
So here's the story. I pull up to the gas station to fill up my SUV, and that takes a minute because they suck up a lot of gas. And while I'm standing there waiting on it to fill, this little car pulls up on the other side. The driver steps out, gorgeous, head to toe, absolutely beautiful, perfect hair, perfect suit, perfect fingernails, perfect shoes. Just everything about her is perfect. She walks to the back to put the gas in, and I notice that there's a ridge where her wedding ring is supposed to go, but there's no ring there. My eyes scan forward, and I see in the back seat 2 toddlers strapped in the car seats, Cheerios everywhere, hair a disaster, pajamas still on. One has shoes on the wrong feet. The other one has no shoes on, but the socks don't match. As I look back to the driver, our eyes meet. I see tears streaming down her face. Most of her makeup is gone. And I looked at her and I said, I was raised the only son of a single mom. And then I married one. Can I pray for you?
Wow.
So here's some things to note about the power of story. One sentence and one question is the story that the woman at the gas pump heard. That's the whole story. I was raised the only son of a single mom. Now, there's a whole lot that you can build into that. How many other people do we know are now multimillionaires who were raised the only son of a single mom? How many in the NBA? How many in the NFL? How many all over the world who were raised by mom because dad wasn't around? And so the nature of their character is a little bit different. But not only was I raised by a single mom, I married one. I married a woman who had a 5-year-old daughter at the time that I married her. Now, the whole reason for making those 2 statements is that those 2 statements encompass a whole lot of story in just the 2 statements. Here's some of the things it encompasses. Now, I don't know, with the greatest powers of observation that I have, if this woman is crying without her wedding ring on because she caught her husband in an affair. I don't know if she left in a hurry this morning and she's had quite a morning already looking at the kids, if maybe she just left the house without her ring and she's crying because he's going to be upset when he finds out. I also don't know if maybe she's on her way to the hospital to identify the body. I don't know any of those things. Here's what I do know, because I witnessed it for the most of my life growing up, from the time I was 9 until I left home. I watched my mom do life, raising kids on her own. I watched her face every struggle, every challenge, financially, emotionally, relationally, every bit of drama we had in our house, every failed grade, every celebrated success, every football game, every baseball game, every volleyball. She was there on her own with no support, no financial support, just her. And I know what that looked like. But then I married a woman who got her bachelor's degree in psychology with a minor in statistics in less than 3 years, on the dean's list as a rape victim and a single mom. And so the kind of women that I've seen who've gritted through what it takes to be a single mom, they're heroes. But I also know they're sometimes the crying warrior. And that's what I saw in her. Now, I mentioned my mom also because she's a beautiful girl, but she doesn't need to think I'm hitting on her. I mentioned my wife for the same reason. Nobody hits on somebody that says, hey, let me tell you about my mom and my wife. That's not a very successful pickup lines, guys, just in case you're curious. It's not going to work. But I can tell you that in that moment, her reaction was, I feel like somebody sees me. Somebody cares about who I am and what I'm going through. Without a whole lot of explanation, without a whole lot of time together, I took her to the one place that I knew there were answers that I didn't have. right to the throne. That's the best I can do. I can't give you $1,000. I don't know what the deal is with your husband or how to solve that problem. That's not my case. But I do know somebody who loves you more than you love yourself. Let me make a connection. And that's the best I can do.
Wow.
Now, I use that story because most people say, well, I don't have time to tell a story. And the reason is they're thinking of an entire memoir that starts with the day I was born and ends with yesterday. Or they're thinking of a story like a novel where you've got to pull in so many details that you just can't even get through it in a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know who was willing to time me on that, but from the
That
time
was
that I pulled up to
60
the gas
seconds.
point,
60
seconds.
Yep.
In 60 seconds, I delivered to you a story that allows you to relate to so many things. And here's the beauty of it. Dr. Caroline Leaf says the human brain cognitively moves at about 2,000 bytes per second. Some say up to 2,700 bytes per second, 27 KB. You might remember the old 56K dial-up modem.
Yep.
Yeah, we're talking about 27, 2.7, not even a megabyte per second. We're talking really slow. That's the conscious mind, but the subconscious mind moves at 40 gigabytes a second.
Wow.
So in a 60-second story, there are images, there are memories, there are relationships that are firing off in your subconscious mind that I didn't put there, that I didn't illustrate to, that I didn't point to. But I know that they're there because you're a human with human experiences. And those human experiences have exposed you at some time or another to a single mom and what life is like. The power of a story in 60 seconds or 2 minutes, when it's well crafted, underline that if you're taking notes, when it's well crafted, takes into consideration all of the means of psychology, the speed of the subconscious brain versus the conscious brain. It takes into the emotional triggers, the factors of the past. It's why when I teach a course, I talk about using the co-opted enthymeme and not word pictures. Word pictures can be very dangerous in re-traumatizing someone who's had a horrific past. The ability to craft a story by rehearsing it again and again and again, asking, who am I talking to? What am I talking about? What emotions will that invoke in them? What will I bring up without even saying it that could cause pain or build endearment? And am I responsible to them for that? A story has so many levels that it speaks to the mind, will, and emotions, or the soul of a person. But because we know, and I love the way Caroline Leaf says this, she says people talk about multitasking. Multitasking is a myth. Multitasking in the brain, unfortunately, creates what she calls the biochemistry milkshake, meaning the chemicals in your brain that fire off when you're studying are different than the ones that fire off when you're watching a dramatic movie or a high action movie. All those biochemicals that are floating around in your brain create a chemical milkshake. And if you're switching tasks from something very dramatic to something high energy or something that demands a lot of focus and attention, you're creating a storm in the brain of all kinds of chemicals. It's possible, if you don't craft your story as well, that you're doing that to your listener. Word pictures assume that when I experienced that and felt these three emotions, that when you experienced that, you felt exactly the same three emotions.
Yeah.
That may not be the case. And if it's not, then the words that I say and laugh about may be words that traumatize you. That does not build know, like, and trust. That builds hate, fear, and resentment.
Right.
And if you think you're going to tell a story that someone else finds condescending or separating and build know, like, and trust, you got another thing coming. You're going to lose clients, lose customers, and probably lose friends that way.
So huge, Loren. And I think we just don't, we know stories are powerful, but I think we're not aware. We have to be more careful with this, because an ill-used story, just like what you said, can do more harm than good. So I'd love to be able to ask, and Loren, I know you have a whole masterclass on this. You have online classes. You even have a 6-hour intensive workshop. So this is deep work to craft a story. They say that masters make simple look. They make the hard look easy, and others make the easy look really, really hard. So what you just heard in a minute, 60, I can't believe that was 60 seconds. A lot happened in 60 seconds. That's a lot of rehearsing. But if you were to give the audience a general tip, I'm a business leader. I have a small sales team. I want to increase their motivation, or maybe I'm trying to make a sale or something. Besides the story in our heads, which we talked about earlier, assuming that's all right, we're better there. What's like an essential story that we should work on, and how do we start to craft that direction?
So one of the things that I've learned to be true, and the more I study communicators, the more my opinion of it becomes even more pronounced,
Mm,
is that when you use someone else's stories or anecdotes, you destroy your own credibility.
mm, mm,
I watched a guy stand on the platform in front of a very large church, at one time the sixth largest in the United States, possibly top 10 in the world,
mm.
stand on the platform and if I told you his name, you would probably know him if you're a kingdom person at all, because he is an extremely prolific author, has
Mm.
had radio shows for decades. But I watched him walk to the platform and take the mic and tell a story firsthand, as if it had just been his experience,
Mm.
that I read the night before on Facebook.
Oh,
And I
oh,
thought to myself, with all the years that you have in ministry, with all the relationships that you've built, with raising your kids and grandkids, with everything you've been through, why can't you tell me a story that you lived through?
mm, mm,
Tell me something genuine about you. So in the 6-hour masterclass, one of the things that we spend the bulk of the time, in fact, I'm just this weekend finishing up the upload of the online story power masterclass.
oh, wow.
Out of the 28 videos,
Mm,
19 of the 28 videos in that course are in the story crafting segment.
mm,
And it's because we start with story mining and story selection, and we ask, what story from my life is worth telling again? And here's one of the keys. The story at the gas pump involved 2 women,
mm,
because I was speaking to a woman. It involved 2 women who were mothers. Oh,
mm,
women who were single mothers. Because whether it was for the day, for an hour, or just the time it took her to fill up her gas tank, she was living her life like a single mom, doing everything on her own.
mm,
Now, it's altogether possible she forgot her wedding ring, and after putting the gas in, she was going back home to get it, and she and her husband were going to have lunch together. I don't know the answer to that question.
mm,
But in that moment, her life was a mess emotionally. Just looking at the kids, good example. The single mothers that I know in my life were the people in the story, which means there's a direct correlation to the audience I'm talking to.
mm,
If the people in the story are my sales team,
mhm.
guess who I'm going to be talking to? My sales team.
Makes sense.
If the people in my story are clients that I've served in the past by some service that I've provided them or a product that I sold to them, guess what I'm going to be talking about? And guess who I'm going to be talking to? If this is a client who's saying, okay, well, maybe you could help me. Think back to job interviews. How many times have you been asked that question? Why should we hire you?
Mm,
Let me give you a story for that one. So we were living in East Texas. It's about an hour and a half drive to the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
mm,
I landed an interview, the first job offer that I got from GTE
mm,
before it was Verizon. I kind of given the cat away already without a bag, because I just told you I spent 10 years there. But the first job interview, I'm driving to the interview. I come around the top side of the airport, about 15 minutes away from the location. I got 25 minutes before my scheduled interview. And as I come around the corner, I see a lady standing on the side of the road, dressed very nicely. It's August. She's dripping in sweat, and her tire is flat.
mm,
I pull over behind her. I take off my suit coat. I roll up my pink shirt sleeves, and I changed her tire for her. And I sent her on her way to make it in time for her interview. She had about 10 minutes. She was about 5 minutes away.
mm,
Now, I've never seen her again. I don't know if she made it to the interview and got the job or not. Here's what I do know. I got back in the car and pulled into my interview 15 minutes late.
mm,
I walk up to the receptionist desk. I've got grease up to my elbows. You can't get in the restrooms on this floor without a key.
mm.
So I'm like, I'm here for my interview. I know I'm late. Can I wash my hands somewhere? And the lady at the receptionist desk goes, you're 15 minutes late for your interview. What makes you think we want to hire you anyway?
Oof.
I said, let me wash my hands and I'll tell you why I was late, and then you can decide.
Mm,
She said, fine. So I go to wash my hands. When I come back to the interview room, the hiring manager, the receptionist, the regional manager, the district manager, and the bookkeeper for the region, all women, all in this room, arms crossed, looking at me going, this better be good. You've got some gall to show up 15 minutes late and tell me you still got a reason that we should hire you. So I told him. I saw the woman on the side of the road. I pulled over and changed her tire because I wasn't looking for a job when I got this one. I'll find another one. If I'm not hired here, that's okay, because here's what I know. Nothing in me would have left her stranded on the side of the road. And if that cost me the job and you don't want people like that working here, I don't want to work here. But if you look at somebody who says, I will sacrifice the possibility of not getting the job because it's the right thing to do, then I'm the right guy and this is the right place for me to work. And I'll leave that entirely up to you. I left the company 10 years later. Now, how many times have you been asked in a job interview, tell me a time when? Or maybe it's in a client process as an entrepreneur, you've got to deliver a product or a service. I have one coming up on Monday where what they said to me was, we know that you do leadership and communication, strategic communication. We want to know if you can train our salespeople to close a big deal. And I said, well, I think that begins and ends with stories. They're like, well, we've already got a sales call process. We just want to know if you can train them. And I said, well, sure, I can train them all to be better communicators, to be better people because of the stories they tell themselves and their clients. And they're like, but what about the sales call process? I said, well, they're pretty much one and the same. Once you've started with a needs assessment, you know what your product offer is, then you can decide if you've got a good fit or not. They're like, well, what about the 3-step call after the seminar? I'm like, I think you're getting in the weeds, but we can talk about it. And they're like, okay, well, do you want to do a Zoom or come to the office? I said, oh, I definitely want to come to the office. If I'm going to pitch you on a $7,500 project, I want you to see me face to face and experience the energy that I have in the room, because I can do a lot of stuff with the camera, but touch you is not one of them. So we have a meeting on, and I will sit down with them, present. And if this works well, they have a total of 20 different employees that I'll be working with. So that's a sizable project. The reality, though, is the ability to tell a story goes so much deeper than reading out of a storybook or reading out of a novel. There's so many other things that go into that. The story being told by Dallas Jenkins for The Chosen is a phenomenal story. It's also a 2,500-year-old story. He's got a lot to work with. And he's seen what's been told right and what's been told wrong. But here's what he can't do. He can't tell you how Jesus felt when. Because he doesn't know. He can conjecture. He can ad lib. He can presume based on his own emotions. But I can tell you stories where I was crying, stories where I was laughing, stories that I was standing on the outside going, I cannot believe I just witnessed that. And those stories allow you to feel what I felt in that moment without being there. They also give you something else very, very valuable. Transparency and integrity together are what I call know. Bob Berg says it best. We tend to do business with people we know, like, and trust, even when the price is too high, the customer service is terrible, and the product sucks. We do business with people we know, like, and trust, hoping at least they'll fix the problem or give us another chance at it, right? But how do you build trust? We've heard 1,000 times. It takes years to build trust and only seconds to destroy it. Let me ask you this question. In the 60 seconds that it took me to tell you the story, remember, the woman at the gas pump didn't get 60 seconds. She got a statement and a question. Do you think there's a chance she trusted me?
Oh, yeah.
Because I revealed something with integrity that was genuine transparency. I wasn't making things up. I wasn't lying. I was telling my story that was relevant to her. And the similarity, know and like is not, hey, you're so cool, let's go have a beer together. No, like is the similarity. It's the common ground. It's rapport. And our rapport was single mom.
Yeah.
Because there was transparency and integrity, because there was similarity, now there's trust. Makes sense. When I say all that, I say that to give you the foundation to say what the story is or what the story is about is not as relevant as, is the story relevant to the audience that you're talking to? Right. If you're talking to teenage girls, talk about teenage girls from a firsthand experience. If you're talking about teenage boys, talk about teenage boys from your firsthand experience. If you're talking to mothers or fathers, the same. If you're talking to business owners, I remember going in to make a presentation to a guy one time. Again, I'm selling from my pocketbook. I
Mm-hmm.
said, well, the sign up fee is X, and it was like $1,500. And I said, I know that's a bit steep. We can do that in more than one payment. He looks at me kind of cross-eyed, like, are you trying to insult me? He said, dude, I'll lose $1,500 between here and the airplane just trying to get on the airplane, between the tips and the taxi and the luggage. $1,500 is nothing to me. What I want to know is, can you deliver on the promise of your product?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, what a challenge to my own integrity, right? Because I'm selling on my own pocketbook.
Mm-hmm.
But my perspective is not his perspective. And so what I thought was an important problem was laughable to him, which damaged my credibility. Knowing who you're talking to and what they're capable of, what they want, what they're looking for, all starts with either observation or asking questions. And the story you choose to tell behind that should answer those questions. In the sales process, we call it overcoming objections. Well, if you're listening well enough, you know what their objections are, even if they're not saying them outright. And that doesn't require a checklist. It requires common sense and good listening.
So powerful. My gosh.
Did I answer your question at all?
You definitely answered my question. Yes. So relevance to audience. And I want everyone here to think about, in the next situation you're in, as you think about a story, why is this relevant to them? And that's efficient, effective communication. It's all intentional. We don't just tell a story just to tell a story. That's for later, right? If you just want to hang out. But there's an intention behind everything. And as you were talking, Loren, something came to mind. And I coach a lot of entrepreneurs as well. And we talk about their story. And have you experienced this at all? It's this feeling of, because you also talked about being high in integrity with telling your own authentic story. I find a lot of us think, well, I don't have a story. Their story's better. Like, what do I have to share? Like, what do you have to say about that?
So one of the things that I find very fascinating, if you listen to people like Grant Cardone or Gary Vee, that aside from the language issue, their perspectives on life come from a completely different angle than, say, a Kardashian or the people that I grew up with in a small town. Most of them broke. If you've been to Erie, Pennsylvania, after being part of the steel magnates of the world, became the Rust Belt. And the whole emotional energy of the town is in that category. Now, to think that the humans who live there have no stories would be laughable. Here's their challenge. We compare Gary Vee's story with my story and go, oh, but his life has been so much better. It's been golden. I look at Grant Cardone. I mean, this is a guy you can drop off in town with none of the people in his list, no cell phone, no credit cards, no cash in his pocket, no ability to connect with people. And he can go from nothing to $1 billion in 90 days. He proved it. Well, how do you do that? You know some strategies. You know some things that worked and some things that didn't work. You know how not to waste times on things that didn't work and waste your time or invest your time only on things that did work. I was standing in the garage one day and I was playing with this thing. I was spinning it between my hands. It looks like a mixer, like you would make a cake with. And as I would spin it, it would open up and then close back up. And I'd spin it some more and it'd open up and then close back up. My uncle walked up behind me and smacked me in the back of the head. Think Gibbs on NCIS. I'm like, what the heck was that for? He said, you don't even know what that is. I'm like, yeah, but that didn't give you a right to slap me. So I spun it again. I said, it's really cool. When I spin it, it opens up like this. And he smacks me again. He's like, you don't even know what that is. I'm like, who cares what it is? It's cool. He said, if you knew what that was, you would realize that every time you do that, you risk damaging a $500 tool.
Wow.
Who knew? I mean, I could have taken it to the pawn shop. It would have been more productive than spinning it in my hand, right? But I had no idea what its purpose was. Turns out that thing I was spinning was not a mixer not a beater for the mixers. It was a cylinder hone. You put it on the edge of the drill and you put it down in the edge of the cylinder of an engine and polish out the inside of the engine. So when you rebuild it, it has better compression. I didn't know that. Yeah. I was 12. I didn't care. How often do we find ourselves in a realm where there are two things that are true at the same time? I didn't know what I didn't know. And the purpose for which that thing was intended gave it value. Not what it was doing at the time, not even what I chose to do with it. So if you look at a Gary Vee or a Grant Cardone, they know things I don't know. I would only be wise to listen to what they have to say.
Yep.
Whether I agree with it or not, the question really is, does it work?
Mm.
And if it works, can I modify my life around what actually is proven to work and begin to do something different?
Right.
Because I don't know what I don't know, and they know something I don't know. I should listen. But I also need to understand that I have a purpose.
Mm.
My purpose and Gary Vee's purpose are not the same.
Mm-hmm.
And my purpose and Grant Cardone's purpose are not the same. And so if my story sounds just like their story, there's something wrong with the story.
Mm. Mm.
I wasn't made for that. I was made for something else. And I'm okay with that. Now, it doesn't mean that I abandon the principles and the concepts and the theories that are proven to have strategic value and success.
Yeah.
But I might look at those very things and go, how do they fit with my purpose? What am I here for?
Makes sense.
Why was I created? Why do I not look like a cylinder hone and I look more like an egg beater?
I think that's so important to understand. We're all uniquely designed and created in the sight of God, and we've all been given a different assignment. It says that we're all parts of the same body, right? And we all do different things. And I wanted to ask, because it's very apparent, Loren. I know one of the big questions I think entrepreneurs have, people have, what's the purpose of my life? And how do I know my call? How do I know what I'm gifted at? What is that purpose? And very evident, you know what your purpose is. And you can tell when you know who you are and whose you are, you have integrity, you have confidence, and it doesn't matter what's going on. You compare yourself with you and who God made you to be. But any tips on the person that's wondering what my gift is or what my call is? How do you know?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, just in the last 10 years, that has been a massive journey for me
Mm.
as I've come around, so to speak, to understanding not only what my calling is, but how my gift sets, how my skills, how the things that I've invested in seem to fill that.
Mm.
So if you haven't taken it already, I highly recommend Strength Finders 2.0.
Mm.
It is a test that you can take. You buy the book, it's 20 or 30 bucks. Do not read the book. Go to the back, take the test. After you complete the test and submit it online, then you can read the book because it will explain to you what the test has already discovered
Mm.
about you.
Mm.
It's somewhere around 350 million to 1 accuracy
Wow.
in identifying your greatest strengths. Growing up all of my life, I've been the guy, I fell asleep in the fire academy and I would wake up and answer questions. And one of the guys that caught me on that one time asked me a question. I answered his question and he said, "You're not right. I just told you when I started this lecture, nobody knows the answer to that question. What makes you think you know?" Unfortunately for him, his auditor, who was determining whether he was qualified to teach the class or not, was sitting in the back,
Mm.
who just happened to have a master's degree in physical sciences, which included a degree in physics and chemistry. And when I answered his question, I said, "Well, I think it works like this." He was like, "You were sleeping. You're just making stuff up." And the guy in the back goes, "Yeah, write down what you got on the board, though, because there's a really good chance he's right." And he's like, "Nobody knows how it works." He goes, "No, I think he may be right." We're like, "How is that possible?" Okay, so first place in science fair, overall physics twice, first place overall and first place physics
Mm.
by myself on my solo project my senior year in high school.
Mm.
Scholarships for physics and music and speech to go on to University of North Texas. I abandoned all of those over a girl. And because a radio station guy said to me, "You know, if what you think is true is actually true, you will disprove the law of relativity."
Wow.
Okay. I think Elon's done that a couple of times now. Elon Musk has done what everybody thought was impossible. Send the rocket up, bring the rocket back. You can't do that.
Mm.
So he did. But see, I was not around a group of people that said, "We believe
Mhm.
you have the potential to actually do what is in your imagination, so do it." Instead, I shelved those things. I went to school for electronics engineering and never took the scholarships that were offered for music, physics, and speech. I abandoned all of them, walked away from them.
Mm.
Then I went to the Air Force and had too bad a driving record, 13 moving violations to get a top secret security clearance. So even my electronics engineering couldn't be used in my career, and that's how I became a firefighter.
Mm.
It was when I was on the phone with John Maxwell after I joined the John Maxwell team. And I'm driving down the road, headed to Las Vegas to compete in the World Championship of Public Speaking.
Mm.
And as I'm driving down the road, John pulls me up on the call and he says, "So why did you join the team and what do you plan to do with this? And my answer was this. I want to be the next James Dobson. I want to write books and travel around the world saving families. And John Maxwell's reply to me personally was, don't you dare. What? He said, we already have a James Dobson. The world doesn't need another James Dobson. The world needs the best Loren Norris God could possibly make from you. That was heavy conviction. Well, shortly after that I took the Strength Finders. And guess what I found? My number one is learner. There's nothing else in my life that I love more than learning. I am a carnivorous reader. If my black wall wasn't behind me, you would see a bookshelf that is 30 feet long and floor to ceiling and still double rows and books stacked on top. I can't get enough learning. It's what gives me joy. If I can be left alone and sit around with a cup of coffee and a couple of books, I will read for hours. That's what I love to do.
Amen.
When I can't do that, I'll put in headphones and watch YouTube. What does that mean? It means that consuming knowledge for the purpose of giving it to other people. Well, I also have futuristic and strategic. My number 4 is communication. Strengths Finders really helped me to put those things in line. And then I heard Dr. Caroline Leaf say this. She said, if there's something that you do, and when you do it, people look at you and go, how did you do that? But you've been thinking to yourself all along, I thought everybody could do that. That's your unique talent. I was reading a book by Brendan Burchard, and he said, I want you to go home and I want you to take every trophy, every ribbon, every badge of honor you've ever won in your life, and I want you to lay them all out on the floor or the bed or wherever you need to scatter them all out. And then I want you to cluster them into little piles until you can look at the piles and realize there's one pile where there's more trophies, more ribbons, more awards than in anything else I've ever done. And realize that's a designated marker for you. And I thought, that's an interesting exercise. And then I thought back to John Maxwell. Be the most you can possibly be. Then John also said this. He said, whatever it is that you find to be your strengths in this life, if you push as hard as you can move the needle maybe 2 points. If you're a 6, you could be an 8. If you're an 8, you could be a 10. If you're a 9 or a 10, you could be the Michael Jordan or the Tiger Woods of that thing. You could actually literally be the best in the world. Now, there are going to be things that you're pretty good at. You're a 4 or a 5 already. Understand this, though. If you push as hard as you can, that 4 becomes a 6, which means you're just above average. With your best effort, you're mediocre. Why bother? But if you can figure out what you're already the best in the world at, that thing can change your life. Add the diligence, add the discipline, add the focus and the priorities to that. Remember the Pareto principle. 20% of what you do gets 80% of the results. Do that. Do it consistently, do it well, and study on it till you become the best in the world at it and never let it go. So if you know what your strengths are, Strength Finders is a great tool to assess that. If you know what your natural gift or talent is, when everybody else goes, holy cow, how do you do that? And you're like, well, I thought everybody could do it. They can't. That's yours. And when you realize that there's something you've already proven success at, now you have a trifecta. When I laid out all those things, I had trophies and ribbons in 2 categories. Billiards, pool playing. I had competed in the national level at that after winning tournaments and leagues for years. I've been playing since I was 18 years old. And the other was speech. I won my first district trophy in impromptu speaking, having never done it before. I got in trouble and my teacher threw me in a classroom and I won at the district level, having never competed before. Wow. That's a natural talent. Since then, I've competed in the Great American Speak Off with Pete Vargas and Grant Cardone, in the international Toastmaster speech competition called the World Championship of Public Speaking. I finished as a semifinalist in both of those, in the top 100 out of 30,000 plus. I have a gift in that, but I also have the responsibility to steward that talent until it multiplies. I have the responsibility to be financially and fiscally responsible for the investments that I make in it and the return that comes back. I also realize the stories that I tell have a deep and lasting impact on the emotional psyche of the people I tell those stories to. And if I'm not responsible in doing that, I can cause damage and ultimately cause separation between them and Abba. And that I am not willing to do.
Wow. My gosh. Guys, that was the best description I've heard about finding your calling and gifting. So you're going to want to lock that in. Do exactly what it is that Loren just said right there. A quote came to mind. It's kind of cheesy, but it's true. It's a Spider-Man and his Uncle Ben says, with great power comes great responsibility. That's just what I heard right there.
Yes.
It's absolutely true. As you round out, Loren, there's just so much gold today. Thank you so much for sharing everything. I'd love to ask a couple of quick questions and then one last message from you. But here we go. So just curious, do you have a favorite Bible passage or verse at all? Or like a story or anything?
Well, my favorite story would be when Jesus is standing for Pontius Pilate, and Pontius Pilate says, "Don't you know I have the power to crucify you or set you free?" And Jesus replied, "The only power you have over me is that which my Father has given you." It's a bit of a snide remark, but it was ultimately and infinitely true. When we realize that, all those things that try to bring fear into our life ought to fade into nothing, because if Dad didn't say so, it ain't going to happen. As simple as that. Amen. But my life verse is 1 John 2:27. Let not any man teach you, but the anointing of the Holy Spirit. He is the truth, and in him there is no lie.
Amen. Thank you for that. And any favorite pastors that you follow, whether it's your own local church pastor or just people around?
Well, before the debacle, I would have said Ravi Zacharias is up there in that list, because his apologetic wisdom and tact was really, really good. David Wilkerson obviously is in that list for me. There are some local guys that I have surrendered to in service. T.D. Jakes, John Maxwell, obviously one of the greats. Max Lucado is one of those in that list. I fancy myself to be a writer like him. Interesting story if you got time for it about that one.
Yeah,
but
for sure. Go for it.
So we moved to San Antonio to take a job back in 1998 and couldn't find the right church home. So we decided to go to a little church called Shady Oaks. And we showed up there and went a couple of Sundays. And the first Sunday that we were there, I took 2 poems that I had written. They were printed and lithographed, and they looked really, really pretty. And I walked to the front of the room and I said to Max Lucado, "Hey, I just wanted to give you these. A lot of people have compared my writing style to yours, and I wanted you to have them." He stuck them in the back of his Bible. It was a greeting line. Hundreds of people come to the front of the church. I didn't think anything else about it. Well, we did decide to make that our church home. And so we went through what they would call the lay counseling, welcome to the church kind of classes. And my wife and I were coming down the stairs, very narrow hallway, 3,000 people in the church. We're bumping into people left and right. It was kind of like the scene where Jesus stopped and went, "Who touched me?" It was a moment like that. We're like, everybody's touching you. Are you kidding me? And finally, I feel this poke in my chest. And I look up, and the finger belongs to Max Lucado. And he said, "Your name tag says Loren." I said, "It sure does." He said, "But your name's not Loren." I said, "It is." He said, "But the poems you gave me a year ago said James L." I said, "I can't even believe you remember that." He said, "They're in the back of my Bible. I see them every time I study." Wow. That was profound to me, that out of all those people, all that sea of people, he not just recognized my face, but had a direct connection and recognized the name that he saw on my name tag didn't match. Skip forward 3 years. We're no longer in San Antonio. I've been in East Texas for several years at this point, had been working for a political firm, and I went to Promise Keepers. And I got lost trying to find the men's room, and I ended up somehow back behind the stage, behind the curtains. I'm going, for God's sake, where is the men's room? And I look up, and there are 3 people coming at me, and I'm like, can somebody point to the men's room? And the guy answered, and I recognized his voice before I saw his face. And Max said, "Hey, Loren, yeah, just keep going straight. You're almost there." And I was like, you've got to be. These people walking with Max Lucado looked at him like, "You know that guy?" I'm like, that guy knows me? The power of celebrity often clouds our vision. But his humility spoke volumes. There's probably 1 or 2 books that I don't yet have by Max Lucado, but my library, Max Lucado, Frank Peretti, and John Maxwell, I buy every one of them. I can find some of them I have multiple copies of.
Wow. Makes sense. Well, that was going to answer my next question of favorite books. any top one of all those authors, if someone were to want to
Yes,
start?
This Present Darkness by Frank Peretti.
Mm.
This Present Darkness is a fictional account of the reality of the supernatural. And for anybody who's saying to me, I'm having a hard time with this God thing, I said, forget about all the theology for a moment. Just go read this book.
Got it.
Have you read it yet?
I haven't. I'm going to read that.
Go get it.
I have it down.
You can find it in any half-price books for under $10. You can find it in Goodwill stores all the time. Half-price books used to put them in the clearance section, and I'd buy them for $2 every time I saw them. We would keep 10 or 12 on our bookshelf to give them away. And when they realized that people bought them off the clearance, but they wouldn't buy them at the $6 or $8 price, they don't care what the condition is. That book is $6.95 because it never stops selling. It's a top seller anywhere you get it. But if I see them in a thrift store, we do thrift store shopping all the time because I can buy books for $1 and I'll spend $50.
Yeah, makes sense.
If you see one there, you can get it for that price.
I will grab that for sure. And I guess the last question I'd have is for the faith-based entrepreneur, what last message would you give to them during times like this? What's a word you want to give to them?
The seek ye first the kingdom sounds like an indictment because it is. It is your mission on earth. I don't care what your gifts and talents and skills are. If you know the name Nick Vujicic, who I've been blessed to share the stage with, then you know a man who is born with no arms and no legs, who many doctors said really has no purpose to live. But when you see teenage girls crying their eyeballs out and teenage boys that are all buff football players crying their eyes out, standing in line to hug a man who cannot hug you, he's a man who's living out his purpose. He is seeking the kingdom. His success as an author, as a speaker, as an evangelist is unrivaled in our generation. His success takes really good care of his family. I was part of a ministry for a season when I spoke on stage with him, where he literally gave a house for 2 years to this ministry to continue to do their work in a different way. How do you give away your house unless you're blessed? Seek first the kingdom. Let daddy do the rest.
Amen to that. Well, Kingdom Builders, this has been a blessing just for me. I'm sure it has been for you as well too. Subscribe, share this, do all that type of stuff, and follow Loren everywhere. But Loren, let us know what's the best way to stay in contact with you. What are some of the cool programs that you have? You have a bunch of stuff, but where's the best places to go?
If you just go to jlorennorris.com, you can find me there. Of course, the podcast, Leading Leaders Podcast, is committed to always be free. No subscription, no ads. I very seldom do interviews on it. It is just a 15 to 20 minute live teaching Monday through Friday. That's it. It's teaching from a biblical worldview into the category of leadership. But most of the time I don't quote scripture. If I do, I quote it as an ancient author might say. That's a good place just to get the kind of stuff that I feel like God's downloading to me on a daily basis. And again, that's God testing my impromptu speaking, because he doesn't give me the message until I've already hit all the lights and all the mics and set everything up in the studio. Then he gives me the title, and from the title constructs a message. Most of the time I have no idea what it's going to be until I start typing the title. They almost all start with leaders know, and then he fills in the rest. And sometimes they're challenging because he asked me to talk about things that are going to irritate people. But you can find that on Spotify, Apple, whatever your favorite. It's on Amazon, all the other Google downloads, Google Market, whatever. That's probably the best free engagement. You're going to get anything that I have to say right there, absolutely free of charge. If you want to engage as a client, then the Superpower Masterclass online will be ready by Monday. That's my promise to my market. My deadline was the 15th and I missed it, but I will promise to the market it will be available by Monday because I got so much little left to finish. The Superpower Masterclass intensive is live. It's in person. There's never more than 15 people in the class because I want to have the kind of interaction that we've had in this interview. There will never be 20 or 50 or 75. Now, what I might do in the near future is a live webinar where I will actually walk through the basics of Story Power Masterclass for those who are considering doing the online only because they don't want to travel to Dallas for a live event. But if you can get to Dallas for a live event, I promise you it will be life-changing in the way that you look at story. And for long-term strategic clients, we take that whole Story Power method, and I literally sit down with them and mine through the stories to say, who's the audience you want to talk to? What is it you want to persuade them to do? How can we be responsible? Now let's talk about the stories in your life that will get you there, that will also change the way you think about you and give you something to convey to them. So that's one-on-one coaching. You can find that on the website as well.
Beautiful. Loren, thank you so much for your ministry, your service, your example, your humility. You've blessed me, and I know you're going to bless so many other people through this as well too. Thanks for your time today. God bless Kingdom Builders. Glad you were on here today. Tune in for our next ones. We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having me, James.